They called me just a farmer and fenced off my land, thinking they could bully me into submission. But they had no idea who I was, or the power I held as the state's land director. If you love epic HOA drama and want to see petty tyrants get their comeuppance, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter of this wild story. The sun hung low over the rolling fields of Willow Creek, casting golden streaks across the patchwork of green that James Carver had called home for decades. His family's farm, a sprawling 200-acre expanse, had been in his bloodline for 3 generations, each blade of grass and weathered fence post a testament to their sweat and stubborn pride. James, a man in his late 50s with calloused hands and a quiet demeanor, was no stranger to hard work or the rhythms of rural life. But he was also something else, something the Willow Creek Homeowners Association didn't know. The state's land director, a position that gave him authority over property disputes and zoning laws across the region. To the HOA, though, he was just a farmer, a relic of a bygone era who didn't fit their vision of a polished, suburban utopia. The trouble began when Willow Creek, once a sleepy rural community, caught the eye of developers. Over the past decade, fields had given way to manicured lawns, and old barns were replaced by cookie-cutter McMansions. The HOA, led by Patricia Wentworth, a woman with a penchant for power and an obsession with uniformity, had grown increasingly bold, imposing rules on everything from mailbox colors to lawn heights. James's farm, with its rustic charm and untamed edges, was a thorn in their side. His sprawling property sat at the edge of their jurisdiction, a stubborn holdout against their vision of progress. For years, they'd sent letters demanding he trim his hedges, pave his dirt driveway, or remove the weathered tractor that sat proudly by his barn. James ignored them, tossing their notices into a drawer with a chuckle. He wasn't part of their HOA, and his land predated their bylaws by a century. But Patricia and her board weren't ones to take no for an answer. They saw James's farm as an eyesore, a blight on their pristine community. One crisp autumn morning, James woke to the sound of heavy machinery rumbling near his property line. Stepping onto his porch, coffee mug in hand, he squinted across the field to see a crew of workers unloading metal posts and rolls of chain-link fencing. A bright orange sign declared the area, Future Willow Creek Expansion. His stomach tightened. The HOA had been whispering about annexing nearby land for a new phase of development. But he hadn't expected them to act so brazenly, or so quickly. By noon, a section of his eastern pasture was cordoned off, the fencing cutting through a field where his cattle grazed. A worker, noticing James's approach, shrugged and handed him a notice signed by Patricia herself. It claimed the land was now under HOA control due to an administrative oversight in the county records. James's blood boiled, but he kept his composure. He'd dealt with bureaucratic nonsense before, both as a farmer and in his role at the state level. He knew the HOA's move was illegal. His property lines were ironclad, etched into deeds older than Patricia's entire lineage. But what struck him most was the condescension in the notice, which referred to him as the local farmer, and suggested he comply with community standards or face legal action. They didn't know who he was, and that ignorance was their first mistake. James spent the afternoon poring over his land records, confirming what he already knew. The HOA had no claim to his property. He made a few calls to his team at the state office, quietly setting wheels in motion. If the HOA wanted a fight, they'd get one, just not the one they expected. Over the next week, the fencing crept closer to James's farmhouse. The workers, under Patricia's direction, moved with a smug efficiency as if their authority was unquestionable. Neighbors began to whisper, some sympathetic to James, others swayed by the HOA's promises of rising property values. Patricia held court at the community center, rallying residents with talk of modernizing the area and elevating standards. She painted James as an obstacle, a stubborn holdout who refused to embrace progress. At one meeting, she waved a manicured hand and scoffed, dismissing him as just a farmer who didn't understand the bigger picture. The crowd nodded along, unaware that James's role as land director gave him access to records, laws, and leverage that could unravel their plans in an instant. James, meanwhile, worked methodically. He requested surveys from the state archives, cross-referencing them with the HOA's shoddy annexation claims. The records were clear. Not only was his land untouchable, but the HOA's expansion violated several zoning regulations. Their permits were incomplete, their boundaries misdrawn, and their entire project rested on a foundation of forged signatures and outdated maps. James could have shut them down with a single phone call, but he held back. He wanted to let the HOA dig their own grave, to expose their arrogance before delivering the final blow. Each day he watched the fencing inch closer, the metal gleaming like a challenge. He took meticulous notes, photographed every post, and documented every violation. The HOA thought they were boxing him in, but James was laying a trap. By the end of the month, the fencing had cut off a third of his pasture, restricting his cattle and blocking a stream that fed his crops. The HOA sent another letter, this one demanding he remove his livestock or face fines for non-compliance. James read it with a wry smile, imagining Patricia's face when she realized her mistake. He decided it was time to act, not with a lawsuit or a public outburst, but with the quiet precision of a man who knew the system better than anyone. He scheduled a meeting with the county planning board where he'd present his findings. As land director, his word carried weight and he intended to use it. The HOA's overreach was about to collide with the reality of his authority, and James was ready to watch their empire of petty rules crumble. The air grew colder as November settled in, and the stage was set for a reckoning. James drove to the county office, a folder of documents tucked under his arm. His face calm but his resolve like steel. The HOA, oblivious to the storm brewing, continued their work, unaware that their next move would push them past the point of no return. The county planning board meeting loomed like a thunderhead over Willow Creek, though the HOA remained blissfully unaware of the trouble they'd stirred. James Carver, in his unassuming flannel and work boots, arrived at the county office early, his folder of documents now a thick dossier of evidence. Inside were surveys, deeds, zoning laws, and a detailed record of the HOA's violations, each page a nail in the coffin of their overambitious expansion. He'd spent weeks preparing, cross-referencing every detail with his team at the state level, ensuring no loophole could save Patricia Wentworth and her board. As land director, James had seen his share of property disputes, but this one was personal. The HOA hadn't just trespassed on his land. They'd insulted his legacy, his family, and the life he'd built. Now they'd learned the cost of underestimating him. The meeting room buzzed with the usual crowd, county officials, a few developers, and a handful of residents curious about the agenda. Patricia arrived late, her heels clicking with authority, flanked by two board members in crisp blazers. She carried a leather binder and a confident smile, clearly expecting to charm her way through the proceedings. The HOA had submitted their expansion plans to the county, claiming their annexation of James's land was a done deal. Their presentation was slick, filled with glossy renderings of new homes and promises of economic growth. Patricia spoke of community enhancement and streamlining property use, carefully avoiding any mention of the fencing that now marred James's fields. To her, the matter was settled. James was just a farmer, after all, and farmers didn't win against progress. When James's turn came, he stood slowly, his weathered hands placing the dossier on the table. The room fell silent as he began, his voice steady but firm, outlining the HOA's illegal actions. He presented the original deeds, proving his family's ownership of the land since 1892. He showed the falsified maps the HOA had submitted, juxtaposed against certified surveys from the state archives. He cited zoning laws they'd violated, permits they hadn't obtained, and signatures they'd forged. Each point landed like a hammer, dismantling their case piece by piece. Patricia's smile faltered, her fingers tightening around her binder. The board members exchanged nervous glances, realizing their oversight wasn't just a mistake, it was a catastrophe. James saved his trump card for last. He revealed his position as the state's land director, a role that gave him oversight of every property dispute in the region. The room stirred, murmurs rippling through the crowd. Patricia's face drained of color as James explained how the HOA's actions violated state law, subjecting them to fines, legal action, and the immediate reversal of their annexation. He didn't raise his voice or gloat. He didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves, and the county officials, now wide-eyed, scribbled notes furiously. James requested an injunction to halt the HOA's construction and remove the fencing, along with an investigation into their practices. The board chair, A stern woman who'd clashed with Patricia before nodded gravely, promising swift action. By the time the meeting ended, the HOA's expansion was dead in the water. Patricia left in a huff, her heels clicking faster now, her board members trailing behind like chastened dogs. James, meanwhile, drove back to his farm, the dossier still tucked under his arm. He'd won this round, but he knew Patricia wouldn't go down quietly. She was too proud, too entrenched in her vision of control. As he pulled into his driveway, he saw the fencing still standing, a stark reminder that the fight wasn't over. The HOA would regroup and James needed to be ready for their next move, whatever it might be. If you're hooked on this HOA showdown, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell for the next 2 chapters. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this drama unfolds.